Well, good evening and welcome everyone to the 2018 Vice-Chancellor's Lecture, which will be presented by Professor Ron Barnett, entitled Transforming the University, an Ecological Approach. So, I think I know quite a lot of people in the room, but for those who don't know me, my name's Peter Dawkins. I am the Vice-Chancellor and President of Victoria University, and it's a privilege and pleasure to have a lecture in my name, and a particular privilege to have Ron Barnett as our Vice-Chancellor's lecturer this year, a very distinguished leading thinker about universities and about higher education on the global stage. I will say a little bit about Ron and introduce him, and I'll also say something about the topic for this evening, transforming the university, an ecological approach, and also about the purpose of the Vice-Chancellor's lecture series. But before I do all of that, I would like to begin by acknowledging the ancestors, elders and families of the Boonwurrung and the Woiwurrung of the Kulin, who are the traditional owners of university land. As we share our knowledge practices within the university, we may pay respect to the deep knowledge embedded within the Aboriginal community and their ownership of country. We acknowledge that the land on which we meet is a place of age-old ceremonies of celebration, initiation and renewal, and that the Kulin people's living culture has a unique role in the life of this region. And I might add that you're probably aware that this week is NAIDOC Week, and the National Aboriginal and Islander Day Observance Committee Week. And actually it's got a particular connection with Footscray, which is that William Cooper, famous Aboriginal activist in the 1930s, was the person who led to there being this annual Observance Day. So we have a special connection in Footscray with NAIDOC Week, and Aboriginal and Indigenous education is a key part of VU's strategy and VU's ecosystem, which is an ecosystems is what Ron is going to be talking about tonight. I want not only to welcome Ron, but to welcome a number of other people here tonight, particularly our Deputy Chancellor, who's Acting Chancellor, Gai Hamilton. Welcome to you. Welcome to other distinguished guests, colleagues and friends. The purpose of the annual Vice-Chancellor's Lecture is to have an internationally significant academic share their thoughts and expertise in a field of strategic importance for Victoria University. We've had a number of those over the years. Professor Yong Zhao, you may remember, talking about entrepreneurial education, Clyde Williams talking about sport, science and its contribution to Olympic success, Ross Garnaut talking about the Australian economy. We had the Chief Scientist Ian Chubb on STEM, on science, technology, engineering and maths. Last year we heard from Professor Sally Kift, who's actually one of Peter Noonan's panel this year, reviewing the AQF. Sally Kift, who's a Vice-Chancellor's Fellow now, talking about making a success of first year, which of course was particularly relevant at a time we were looking at transforming the first year experience at Victoria University. And this year we decided to get our speaker to talk about transforming the university, and we thought what better person to do that than someone who influenced our white paper. So some of you will be aware we produced a white paper on our transformational agenda, and we were influenced in that paper by the work of Ron Barnett. And I'm not going to say a great deal about Ron Barnett's work because he's going to speak for himself tonight, but it was very influential in our white paper, and he talks about the ecological university, and I can recommend his book, The Ecological University, to you. And he talks about ecosystems and universities as part of a number of ecosystems, and we felt that that was very relevant to our transformational agenda. And I'm actually going to share with you a diagram which you'll see at the bottom. It says, based on Barnett are the coming of the ecological university. And those of you who are seeing it for the first time might wonder what the hell it is, because it's got all sorts of dimensions and components. But I'm really pleased to say that Ron likes it. I was very nervous before I met him whether he actually liked this diagram or not. But in it, you'll see that we have our moral purpose as one of the driving forces, and these four things are the four big ideas that underpin our transformational agenda, and the the moral purpose is about transforming lives of students and transforming communities. We've also got this concept of a university without boundaries, a university that's very engaged and connected with the world, and part of a range of ecosystems, which is a good fit with Ron's view of a university. We're focusing on 21st challenges and developing 21st skills and capabilities as well as knowledge, and we have got a particular focus on health, sport and active living and sustainable industries and livable cities, but engaging with local and global communities as we pursue that agenda. And so, thanks to Ron for inspiring that diagram. Lorraine Ling was an important part of that as well, who's very familiar with Ron's work. So that probably is enough from me, other than to do a slightly more formal introduction of Ron, as he has a very distinguished career behind him, and I'm sure continuing ahead of him. But Ron Barnett is Emeritus Professor of Higher Education at University College London Institute of Education, where he was Dean of Professional Development and subsequently Pro-Director, responsible for the Institute's longer-term strategy. He was also active in the Federal University of London, being a member of its Senate and chairing for several years its Research Degrees Committee, its members drawn from all colleges and institutes of the whole university. So he's not only a big thinker about higher education and universities, but he's been a practitioner, and it's being able to bring together that practitioner and that theoretical view that is one of Ron's great attributes. He's a past chair of the Society for Research into Higher Education, was awarded the inaugural prize by the European Association for Educational Research for his outstanding contribution to higher education research, policy and practice, and is a fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences, the SRHE and the Higher Education Academy. He's a visiting professor at several universities in the UK and across the world, and has been a guest speaker in 40 countries. For over 30 years, he's been advancing a social philosophy of the university and more widely to establish the field of philosophy of higher education. He has characterised his position as that of a social philosopher of the university, at once realist, critical, imaginative and practical. And in that work, he has been attempting to identify creative concepts and practical principles that might enhance universities and higher education. He's written 31 books, including the most recently published, the one I showed you, The Ecological University, and a range of others that I won't read out. It is terrific to have Ron with us, Professor Barnett, here tonight. I'm truly delighted he's agreed to present the 2018 Victoria University Vice-Chancellor's Lecture. I'm sure you'll find this evening's lecture thought-provoking, and we will have a Q&A after Ron speaks for the next 30 minutes. Welcome, Ron Barnett.
Well, hello everybody, good evening. What a joy and privilege it is to be here giving the Vice-Chancellor's lecture. I want to thank VC, Professor Peter Dawkins, for inviting me here. It is very special for me to be here. One scribbles away, in my case for decades. You hope that some people will read the work. You hope that some people might even be, dare I say, uplifted by it. But what I'm trying to do is to help actually move things along a bit. And it's just tremendous to me to see just that happening here, if I can say so, Vice-Chancellor on the ground, as it were, in Victoria University. So I really do thank you very much indeed. This is a special occasion, if I can say so, not only for you, for the university, but very much for me as well. You've heard a little of my background. I've worn most of the T-shirts. I'm interested not only thinking about higher education and the university, but I'm also interested in finding, through one's thinking, ways of helping institutions actually develop. I've had various leadership roles, and I've been particularly active in relation to the student experience, teaching, learning, and so on and so forth. So that's my background, and I must say that all my administrative roles, my leadership and managerial roles, I think have been tremendously important to me in my scholarly endeavours. They've really helped, I think, infuse my scholarly work with a sense of the practical and the urgency of the need to get somewhere and find ideas which just may work on the ground if we're lucky. You've heard that I would describe myself as a social philosopher of the university. My partner tells me I live in the moon. But I've said in one of my books, my head's in the clouds, but my feet are on the ground. And that's what I've tried to do, to think big, as it were, think, as I would put it, in utopian ways, but to be also at the same time quite attuned to the way the world really is. I think that's absolutely vital. So I'm going to offer you what might seem to you to be rather abstract, but I want you to come with me for the next 25 minutes and just see where we might get to together. So my lecture, what's it all about? Why are we here? And what might it be to transform a university? Why should we even bother? Is it necessary? The university's been around, the Western university's been around now for 900 years. It seems to do pretty well at tinkering around with itself to keep itself going, various reincarnations over the centuries. Why do we need to transform it? And what would transformation mean? What would it look like? Is it just a technical exercise? You tinker around with the resources and you maneuver things a little bit and just go on achieving old ends and aims and goals? Or are we trying to think completely afresh about where we might be going and what we're here for? Might our purposes be quite new for the 21st century? What even might a moral purpose for the university look like? So those are some of those sort of background questions, I think, that are sparking off this talk this evening. Structure of my talk, going to go through pretty rapidly. I've got Tara somewhere looking out, who's going to wave at me and heckle after about 25 minutes, so I don't witter on too much. You haven't got the PowerPoint with you. I always like to know, if I'm sitting in the audience, how many PowerPoints have I got to last through and that the speaker's going to witter on through? Well, I think it's about 20, but I'm going to go through pretty rapidly if I can. I'm going to look at the global situation very quickly. I'm going to think of the way in which universities are responding. I'm going to reflect on this situation, general situation universities are finding themselves in. I'm going to chance my arm by sharing my idea of the ecological university with you, and then I'm going to wind up. I am going to tread on some toes. What's the point of inviting me here unless I'm going to tread on a few toes? Have I gone too fast, too far? Let's just see, I've gone too far. Oh, by the way, I'm technologically illiterate, so anything's likely to happen. Universities today are on a cusp. Many say that they're in ruins, they're in crisis. I don't go with these Jeremiahs, but they are in difficulty around the world for various reasons. They're in danger of being, as I put it, bewitched by the ideologies of the age, the kinds of nostrums the politicians especially come up with. And we come all too easily, I think, to have a rather limited idea of what we're about and how we might understand ourselves. And I want to try and push things open some windows and see what other images and what other perceptions we might have for the university. And I want to suggest an ecological perspective might be helpful, and I'll try and explain what I mean by that. I want to even glimpse a utopian idea of the university, but I want to suggest that my utopian university is actually feasible and actually might be brought off in the best of all possible worlds. In other words, I think we need to think seriously, think about the university. You probably may know that Bertrand Russell, the famous English philosopher, said most of the English would sooner die than think. And then he added, and most of them do. And Heidegger, am I allowed to mention that infamous German philosopher here, wrote a book about what is called thinking, and in it, about page 10, he has one little sentence on the university asking the question, do we think about thinking in the university? And to me, it's a very real life question. Do we have the space to think in a university? And are we even encouraged or allowed to think? It's quite clear that that's what you're doing here, if I can say so, in Victoria University. But I think it's still an important question to ask these days as to whether or not we think sufficiently in the university, especially whether we think sufficiently about the university. A global world of higher education. 26,000 universities in the world, all ducking and diving in their different ways, and all facing tremendous challenge and change in their different nations and in their different situations. Huge dynamic systems going on, interchanging, unfolding in different ways, institutions collaborating with each other, and so on and so forth, forming all sorts of networks right across the world. And each university, of course, is differently positioned in all of this, with its own national and global networks. So tremendous amount of change, ferment, and so on and so forth. And in all of this, each university is trying to identify its USPs, that acronym, unique selling points. What's each university got to offer? And that's a challenge, and you're clearly doing that here in Victoria University, working out what you especially have to offer both Australia and the wider world. So each university engages in an effort to try and identify what it might be offering the world. And in all of this, a kind of language has developed across the world amongst universities. You may be familiar with the kind of, dare I say, management speak. And I remind you, I've worn the T-shirts. I've used the words myself. I've shared them with colleagues. Environmental scanning. We're supposed to listen to the world and find out how the world is speaking to us and imposing itself on us. We're supposed to engage in risk assessment for any kind of activity we have in mind. We're supposed to estimate very precisely the risks involved in actually conducting any action. Scenario planning. We invent different scenarios to work out their possibilities and their implications. Civic engagement. And then we have terms like world class and excellence and so on and so forth. And some of these, I'm afraid, tend ultimately to become rather empty. We simply use this kind of management speak without really getting under the surface of what might be involved. And so there are some considerations that immediately arise out of these first reflections. This is a world, inevitably, nothing new here at all, that's characterized by complexity. It's a complex world in which entities are so complex and so numerous and bumping into each other that the world is literally unpredictable. We don't know what tomorrow's going to be like, let alone what it might be like in 5 years' time. And if you're a follower of English football or a follower of the news in Great Britain, I'm trying to keep up to date, but it's changing so rapidly. We simply don't know what the world is going to be like tomorrow. And so out of this comes, we're told, the need to innovate, and to innovate in sustainable ways, and to transform ourselves. There's a jargon here that develops. And as I say, we slip and slide across the world, using this jargon quite comfortably without perhaps stopping and getting underneath it all. There's a sense that universities worldwide need to reinvent themselves, transform themselves. But where? We hope that the corporate plan at least will tell us where we're going and answer all of our questions. I've written a corporate strategy. It's perhaps not quite as straightforward. Questions arise. What under these conditions is a corporate strategy? If the world is in flux so much, what is the point? And some universities now have a 30-year corporate strategy, and we don't know what the world's going to be like tomorrow. What does that mean? I wrote in one of my books, I believe in corporate strategies. As I say, I drafted one, but what are they under these circumstances? Corporate strategy for me is what I term a set of hopeful fictions. They just sort of open up a few windows, open up spaces for us to glimpse possibilities for us, for our university. But we know the world being so turbulent and uncertain, it's most unlikely they're going to be brought off. But it's still worthwhile doing because it encourages us to think about possibilities for this extraordinary institution we call the university. So it's highly worthwhile. But we need to recognise it can't be, as it were, a straightforward technical process. Identifying your goals, identifying your means, your resources, and away you go. It's simply, the world won't let us do that. But it's still worthwhile. It gives us, for example, a space in which we can come together to have conversations of the kind some of us have been having today in this university. And indeed, therefore, those away days for the senior management team may take on a new kind of emphasis as we dream, as it were, think ourselves into the future, thinking of the possibilities for the university. And that's tricky stuff, it's difficult stuff. So what is it then to guide the compilation of a corporate strategy which is looking to transform the university? Each university working things out by itself, peering into the ether, thinking about possibilities, perhaps mounting its own foresight strategies and exercises, as they're called, or projecting scenarios for itself into the future. If we go this way, what happens? If we go that way, what happens? When I was drafting the corporate strategy for the Institute of Education, I, as it were, drafted a white paper, and I actually put 4 or 5 different scenarios in front of the Institute of Education. There it was, number one in the world for education, world famous. But we still had the challenge, it seemed to me, of thinking about where we might go. Were we going to become like the London Business School, very entrepreneurial, very hard-nosed, very income-driven? Were we going to be more like Birkbeck College next to us, caring about part-time students? Were we going to be more like Goldsmiths College, civic, locally minded? How are we going to go forward? There seemed to be all sorts of possibilities when you really started to think about it. So I think these are important exercises. But how are we going to think about those exercises? Is it just that we make it up for ourselves as we go along? Or are there some general considerations that we should be attending to in virtue of the fact that we call ourselves a university? And that to me is a serious matter. And each university will come at this exercise in its own way. It'll have its resources, its staff, its disciplines, its networks, its position in the culture, in the economy, with the political sphere. So it will be attending to its own position within all of this background and hinterland. And it may even as I've seen, if I can say so, Victoria University doing so remarkably nicely, might even pick up some ideas in the scholarly literature, and that may help to fuel it a little bit more. So I don't agree with those who say the university is in ruins or is in crisis. There are real challenges in front of us, but being hopefully intelligent people, we can make some ground in dealing with these issues. And those who have attended to the literature will become aware that far from ideas of the university being at an end, as many suggest, on the contrary, there are all sorts of ideas of the university scudding about these days. The entrepreneurial university, the digital university, the research university, the civic university, the comprehensive university, and so on and so forth. So lots of ideas out there. Is it just a matter of plucking one of those and away we go? Plucking this strange notion, the ecological university, and away we go? No, we've got to work it out for ourselves. So it's not just a matter of having more ideas of the university, it's a matter of having better ideas of the university and then working it through in a very hard-nosed way as to how that might play out in our own circumstances. But there are, as I say, quite a lot of ideas of the university scudding about. How might we understand them? Here is a quick way of understanding the ideas of the university, with two axes, superficiality and depth on the one hand, and endorsement and criticality on the other. What do I mean by that? Well, top left-hand corner, ideas that are superficial and really are endorsing the way things are going. And here we find these empty terms of our age: the world-class university, the University of Excellence. I'm sure you haven't got those phrases in your website here. Every university puts them into their website, and they become, as a result, quite meaningless and empty. How are we going to fill them out? What do they mean? They're the kinds of phrases, actually, that politicians use when they speak about universities. They're superficial, and they simply endorse the way the world is going anyway. They don't really tell us very much. Bottom left-hand corner, ideas that are a bit critical of the way things are going, but are still superficial. And here I would put ideas like the digital university, the edgeless university. Particularly, this is where we get the digital proselytizers, people who think modern technology, and dare I say, learning analytics are going to solve all of our problems. We just need a few fancy techniques and technologies, and all our problems will be solved. They're critical of this old-fashioned entity called the university. They tell us we're dinosaurs, we're not moving fast enough, we're moribund, and we ought to get with the program and get with all the fancy world that the new technologies are going to offer us. Superficial, critical, but still superficial. Top right-hand corner is where it becomes to get a bit more interesting. We have ideas that are that have some depth to them, but are still endorsing the way the world is going. And here's where I put one of the big contenders of ideas of the university, the entrepreneurial university. It was first launched by a very famous American scholar, Burton Clark, back in 1998. And it took off around the world. And many universities want to proclaim that they are entrepreneurial. It has a depth to it. Many of my sociological colleagues, I tread on toes, are rather sniffy about this term, the entrepreneurial university. They say it's very shallow. Actually, it has a certain amount of depth to it because it does try to tell us that the world is a certain complexity, and the world is changing. There are real forces at work which can't be ducked, and the university needs to attend to these forces. And with all of that, I agree. But then it goes further and says, well, the world is changing in the direction of markets, and the university ought to understand that it ought to become a player in those markets and ought to become entrepreneurial. It has a depth to it because it's attending to the way the world is, but it's still rather simply endorsing the general flow of forces in the world. It's got a depth to it, but it's just endorsing the way things are going. So that leaves us where I want to really focus my intellectual efforts, with the bottom right-hand quadrant, with ideas that might be deep and also critical, but ideas too that might offer us some kind of prospect of moving forward in a worthwhile way. And here's where I will place feasible utopias of the university, if we can find any. It's where I would put the ecological university, and I'll try and explain and justify that. But the question is, can we find ideas that might just help us move forward in a positive way, that are going to do justice to the very nature and idea of the university, yet which have a realism to it. I recognise the way the world is with all of its formidable forces that are at work. So we come to the idea at last of the ecological. My language skills, being English and being a man, are useless. But I understand that the term ecological comes from the Greek oikos, meaning house. What is our home? Where are we to live? How are we to live? This is about the only slide I do this, but I just wanted to refer to another scholar in the literature, continental philosopher, no longer with us, Felix Guattari. He had a little book. When you strip out the introduction and the footnotes and the translation and all the rest of it, only amounts to about 30 pages, but it's incredibly compressed and worthwhile. He talks about 3 ecological registers: the environment, social relations, and human subjectivity. And he sees the ecological as speaking to the interconnectedness of things. Isn't that exactly where we are with a university? But he wants to say this ecosophical perspective allows for difference and diversity. I just offer you this quotation. I won't do this beyond this slide. Everything has to be continually reinvented, started again from scratch. Otherwise, the processes become trapped in a cycle of deathly repetition. Isn't that a nice kind of insight into the way the university is? We need to start afresh, I think, at least in our ideas, and then perhaps too in our institutional processes. And I sense, dare I say, that is something that you're already doing here in Victoria University, starting from scratch. An ecology of the imaginary. We have to imagine things quite differently and be prepared to move according to different criteria than those of profit and yield. I sense that again is what you're doing here. You're wanting to have a sense of the way the world is and of your responsibilities in the world. A new ecosophy, once applied and theoretical, ethico-political and aesthetic. Lots of fancy words, but it seems to me, if I can say so, it actually says a lot about what you're doing here in Victoria University. An ecological perspective, what do I mean by that? What do I mean by it? For me, the ecological perspective is a very rich perspective. The very term ecology is moving in all sorts of directions. It's a very rich concept. It's fact and value all jumbled in together. It tells us something about the way the world is, but it also invites us to think about our values in relation to the world. It tells us that there are systems in the world acting upon us, which are interconnected, internally with each other and externally. And I think that is very much the way the university is. Dynamic and even, dare I say, antagonistic. And we have to live with antagonisms and even conflict. Ecosystems are characteristically impaired in some way. And then issues arise about our responsibilities, humanity in relation to ecosystems. The ecologists have this phrase, deep ecology. I don't know if you've come across that. It talks about the world not only acting upon us, but being entangled with us. It's in us. And I want to suggest that ecosystems of the world are here, right now, even here in this auditorium. Entanglements with the world. Ecosystems are not just out there, but already here with us in the university. And that raises profound questions about our responsibilities to the wider world. The ecological university, therefore, I want to say, takes its embeddedness in the world very, very seriously. It concerns itself with these interconnections. It not only is aware of them, but actually concerns itself with these interconnections and cares about its total environment in every way, material, human, societal, economic, and so on and so forth. All universities are global. These ecosystems are global. All universities are global, whether they realize it or not. I have another quotation there, but I won't burden you with that. Universities are global, as I say, whether they like it or not. They're involved with global conversations, so we need, as well as thinking ourselves locally and regionally, to understand how we are in the world and our possibilities in the world. And there I am in my home in southwest London, and the Times Higher Education magazine drops through my letterbox each week. And what do I see when I open it? I see a nice article all about Victoria University just before I'm due to come here. We are all global universities, no matter how we see ourselves. We are actors in the world. And therefore, the world concerns itself with us, and we concern ourselves with the university. I want to suggest that there are no less than 7 major ecosystems bearing in upon the university. And here they are: knowledge, of course learning, social institutions or society, persons. We have to care about persons. We forget sometimes, not here, but I'm afraid in some universities we forget that students are persons. Culture, the economy and the natural environment. Economy and the natural environment are there, but I've put them at the end because we sometimes overprivilege them in some way, certainly the economy. And I want to suggest, as I say, these ecosystems are here in the university. We're ducking and diving with them all the time. And so we have this kind of configuration of the university today. This is my sense of the university, whether we realize it or not, whether we acknowledge it or not. Each university is configured in some way like this. 7 ecosystems, and the university is entangled with each of them. And you notice that each ecosystem is hazy, it's fuzzy, just as well I can't draw straight, nice circles, because that's not the way they are. And each university, therefore, will have its own, another phrase for you, a Ron Barnett phrase, its own ecological footprint. It will have its own configuration across those 7 ecosystems, given its resources, its disciplines, its personnel, its position in society, and so on and so forth. So each university will have its own ecological possibilities in relation to those 7 ecosystems. Why should we, you remember I said I wanted to suggest that my approach to my scholarly work, my head might be in the clouds, but hopefully my feet are on the ground. Why might we think that any of this could come about? Well, I want to suggest that even though the world has been pressing in the economic agenda onto universities, that I think it may well yet come to demand of us a much bigger range of responsibilities and actions on our part. Why? Because there are all sorts of global and national issues and agendas arising in the modern world, and there's nothing new here, and you're familiar with all of them. The ecological challenge, global terrorism, the movement of global diseases, and all that kind of thing. And at the national level, each nation will have its own particular issues. Some of them, again, will be transnational, intergenerational difficulties, and poverty, and so on and so forth. And so I think the world and society is going to ask of its universities much more than it's been asking up to now. I think for every university, they're going to be therefore, in relation to those ecosystems, all sorts of possibilities. And these are only examples. Each university, if they find any merit in my general thinking, will have to work it out for itself, its own possibilities. These are only some that one's become aware of, and they will be picked up in different ways. Different disciplines will pick them up in different ways. Different opportunities open up in teaching, in research, in outreach to the wider society. Teaching, that towards the bottom of the list, putting each class in contact with a light class in another country. And suppose you're running a civil engineering class, wouldn't it be fantastic if through modern technology you link it up with a civil engineering course, say in South Africa, and get the students to look at the role of the engineer in modern society across different continents and cultures. The public philosopher, have you come across Michael Sandel, American political philosopher? You can see him on the television, you can see his videos. He's extraordinary. He stands in a studio with about 50 or 100 screens in front of him. Each screen has a single student, and the student could be anywhere in the world. And he raises profound questions and issues about, say, euthanasia, or whether we should legalize drugs in society. And he gets these students engaging with a complex issue from all over the world, and he pits them against each other, and he pushes them, leads them on. It's fantastic. The global philosopher. The things we can do now with modern technology. I'm not against modern technology. I might be a dinosaur, but actually I don't think we are imaginative enough about modern technology, what it can do for us in the way it can bring cultures together and spark off profound issues and debates. So I think there's all sorts of things we can do. Moving out in... I was in South America. One university in South America produced these little booklets about health and public issues, which it leaves lying around in bus stations and so forth, informing the wider society. We've got to work it out for ourselves. What are our possibilities? And this is hard work, imagining the possibilities for ourselves. The ecological curriculum. Tara's already waving at me. I'm probably already overstepping my limit, so I must rush on. I try to do what I'm told these days. It's the easiest way. But the ecological curriculum, how could it move across all of those 7 ecosystems that I've been talking about? Getting the students not only active in the community, in projects, real live projects in the community, but moving across disciplines. And as I say, working with students even in other countries. I've had the privilege of interviewing students as to what they do outside of university, and it's magic. You ought to try doing it if you haven't done it. They're doing so many incredible things in their, quotes, their spare time. They might be training for a marathon, but they also might be running a society for other students, raising money, as I remember one example, raising money to support students who wanted to go off and do voluntary work in other countries. So students are amazing these days, the way they are doing so many different things. Are we bringing that learning, that experience into the curriculum? Imagine that. Knowledge is in all their varieties. And so on and so forth, promoting well-being of the students as persons. I'm sure not in Australia, but it's just become a big political matter in the UK, the level of suicides amongst students. It turns out when you look at the data, it's no higher than in the population more generally, but it does still raise issues as to our responsibilities towards our students as persons. Are we really supporting them and nurturing them? One major and very famous, world-famous university in England has had several student suicides in a short space of time. What are we doing? Are we helping students or not? Vibrant pedagogies, all sorts of issues and dimensions come into play when we start to think of the ecological curriculum, how it can help students, help the wider society in all sorts of ways. Imagine, do you have geology here, Vice-Chancellor? Geology as a discipline. Imagine something, a field like that, or a field where you're getting students out regularly, might be in some technical area where you're getting them out into the community. Geology students have to very often find themselves going out. I've not taught a geology student, but we can just imagine going out into the field in a distant land. They find themselves literally rubbing shoulders with and having to communicate with an indigenous community. Think of all the learning and human developmental possibilities that go with that. Bringing that out, making full use of all of that, bringing that into the student experience. The ecological curriculum is there in front of us, waiting to be prized open and realised in all sorts of ways. So I don't want to incur Tara's wrath, so I better bring my thoughts to a conclusion. The university worldwide, perhaps not here in Victoria, but worldwide, is beset, I think, with real challenges and problems, with powerful forces and even, I'm afraid, malign forces acting upon the university. But all is not lost. I'm not one of these Jeremiahs that proclaim the end of the university. On the contrary, I want to suggest that new possibilities and therefore new responsibilities are actually opening for the university in the world today. The problem is we are partly limited by our imaginations. And that requires, as I said right at the start, hard thought, tremendous imaginative effort. I think we can think in utopian ways and should do so, but still think through the real practical possibilities that are in front of us. So I want to suggest that the ecological university, as I've been calling it, reaching out to the world in every way, but also caring about students, staff, the university itself, is necessary, it's feasible, and it's desirable. The question is, are we going to reach out for it? I think it's here, it's just in front of us. Let's go for it. Thanks very much for listening to me. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Ron. That was terrific. And it's now time for a Q&A and a bit of a discussion with the assembled audience. So please, if you would like to ask a question, make a comment, raise your hand, and we have a roving mic.
Or you can just argue or contend
So,
or
Rob
conflict.
Rob Stresti, yeah.
So,
Take the mic.
So, thanks, Ron. I really enjoyed the talk.
Oh, it's okay. My question really is around, you have this notion of utopia, right? So your presentation's kind of infused with the sense of what that might be, and I know with the utopian projects, you can never define what the outcome is because you need to go through the process, if you like, in order to get there. was also reminded by, by the talk around, social democracy, what it kind of looks like. And I get a sense from listening to you talk that that's where you come from in a way, and you're trying to articulate a vision that is both utopian, but draws on a tradition around participation and democracy and what have you.
Yes.
I mean, this university has a really important commitment to reducing inequality,
Yes.
if you like. And I don't really get a sense from you how you might see the utopian university contributing to betterment conceived that way, because it doesn't necessarily have to go that way in order to...
Well, thank you for the question. I hesitate almost to respond in any detail, precisely because, as I've said, the hard work has to be done. And in a multi-faculty university, it's going to differ from one discipline to another, and that's absolutely legitimate. You're absolutely right that I see my conception of the university, the ecological university, as a university that's reaching out and caring about social democracy in every sense. And I'll just come back to that if I might, but quickly on the matter of life chances, of expanding life chances, a favourite phrase of those who are, as it were, on my side of the fence, is that of social justice. And these are important considerations. Each university is going to have to work out what is possible for itself. Are there new ways in which the university can reach out into the schools, into the communities, work with the schools and communities, and encouraging people forward? I know, Vice-Chancellor and colleagues, you have a mix, we call it a dual sector university. You have a vocational education stream or college linked in very tightly with the Victoria University. And you have therefore an opportunity, I think, to really build that up and see if it can be built up and offer a stream, a mainstream into disciplinary and degree studies. So you will have your own possibilities, and that all has to be worked through. But it's a matter too that not just of the top brass doing the hard work, but of encouraging colleagues in the disciplines, colleagues who see themselves as professors and would-be professors in their own disciplines, having a sense that this matters, so that it's really picked up into the bloodstream of the university. I'll just say quickly, if I can, a little bit more on social democracy. Am I allowed to mention somebody called Trump and post-truth, which was the Oxford University Word of the Year 2 years ago? I was talking about new opportunities, new responsibilities, and it does seem to me, why did we have Brexit? Why did we have the referendum that went that way and all that kind of thing? It does seem to me that all of this ferment and this political context is raising profound new questions for the university about how it can enliven and advance the public sphere in all sorts of ways. And this is why I mentioned the what did I call it, the philosopher working with the students and all that. I think we haven't done enough. I haven't done enough as a public intellectual and going out into the wider world to help advance understanding of complex issues. I think this is a new challenge which is opening for universities today.
Right, we've got several questions now, so...
Thanks, Ron, for your talk. I was drawn by one of the quotes that was there and a statement that you made that we need to start from scratch. And it made me think, well, what happens to history, which is probably a good question to be thinking about in NAIDOC week, when Indigenous people remind us that we need to know our past to inform our future. So I was also then wondering, is history an eighth ecology, or is it something that permeates the seven others?
Well, thank you. History is important to me, and you might have sensed, certainly in my work, that I am sensitive to the fact that we do have a history behind us. In the Western tradition, it goes back 900 years, but I'm reminded when I speak in that way that actually Egypt, Persia, China, and other cultures had universities or something like it that went back even further. So the historical dimension is crucial, and we cannot become an ecological university without having a sense of our history, of where we've come from. So that's not to be downplayed. But what I think Guattari is saying, and what I would want to say, is that we need to rethink our fundamental principles. Historically, I would say that the university has been rather internal, rather looked inwards. Look at the architecture of the medieval university. The quadrangles and the buildings looked inwards, and the gate was shut at night time, and all that kind of thing. And I think by and large, academics and the academic culture has been concerned with itself. And I'm afraid, don't get me started on the nature of academic writing, but I'm afraid that academics largely write only for other academics. And write for a small number of academics. And it doesn't matter in humanities and social sciences if it's only a small number of people that can understand their work. So this is important to me because certainly in humanities and social sciences, it seems to me we should be writing in a way that is accessible. So in that sense, I think we need to start from scratch. We need to rethink some of our fundamental concepts and principles as to what it is to be an academic and what it is to be a university.
Terrific. Let's keep going with the questions.
Thank you very much for your talk. It was very inspiring and interesting. I just wanted to go back to your idea of the ecological curriculum where you talked about humanities, including languages, being accorded proper value and giving more attention to the imaginative level. And I think as a sociologist by training myself and someone also with a literary background, I totally endorse those ideas, and I think there's a lot of support for those ideas. But I think the reality is that there are strong forces around us that encourage us to think of the university as an employment factory, and we are kind of constantly under pressure of the forces of economic rationalism. And I just wondered if you had any ideas of how, as universities, we can kind of make inroads against those very strong forces that seem to be pitted against the idea of humanities and the imaginative, and everything has to be measurable and rationalised and so on.
Yes. Well, I'm very much in sympathy with, as it were, what lies under your questions. But what I was trying to say towards the end of my talk, we shouldn't be too gloomy and miserable and feel that we're totally bound in. I think there are, as it were, signs in the ether already to be seen that the world wants more of us than the economic agenda would seem to imply, and even than some of the performance indicators by which we have to understand and measure ourselves would seem to imply. One is inspired, if I can say so, by a university like Victoria University. It suggests that there are spaces for us to think new things, and indeed there is a certain amount of encouragement, I think, to do so. Universities are extraordinary institutions. The wider world speaks with forked tongue in relation to universities. On the one hand, it tries to impose upon us, constrain us, direct us in certain ways, steer us in certain ways. But on the other hand, it knows deep in its heart that it better give us some freedom, because we won't be able to fulfill the roles that the wider world wants from us. So we do have, I think, a little bit more freedom than we sometimes give ourselves credit for. We have room for what the sociologists call agency in this structure. So I think we burden ourselves with sense of too much structure sometimes and don't quite realise the degree to which we may have agency. I'm very struck by a book in political philosophy that came out 3 or 4 years ago by American authors Liston Pettit, called The Organisation as a Corporate Agent. And I don't buy that, all of their argument, but I very much like the idea that the university has corporate agency. And I think this is, dare I say, what we're seeing here in a place like Victoria University.
Now, we're sort of running out of time, but I know there are a few other questions, so what I'm going to do is get all of those questions raised before we ask Ron to answer them. And so, Tara, if you can race the mic around between all the questioners, and if...
Thank you, Professor Barnett. As someone working in VU's marketing, last year was very exciting for us to promote how VU was going to transform tertiary education in regards particularly to our first year model. However, this within the market was sometimes met with hesitance and trepidation from our audience and our market. How best would you recommend to promote a transformative university?
Okay, just think about that one, Ron. If you like, I'll make a note.
Easy
I'll ask
peasy.
you to be a marketing specialist. And the next one.
So we've changed our ecosystem at VU quite substantially, or planning to change some of these things. So we've
Sorry, I didn't quite get the first part.
we're changing our ecosystem at VU quite substantially with
Yeah.
our first year model, which you've heard of.
Yes.
So we've abolished lectures, replaced
Yes.
them with workshops.
Yes.
We're reducing the class size.
Yes.
But one thing that we haven't formally introduced is team teaching. And I just wanted to know what your thoughts on were with team teaching as being perhaps an eighth ecosystem, changing that ratio instead of that 1 academic to 30 students, 2 academics, given
Right,
that studies have shown that team teaching is perhaps the greatest tool that we can have to improve student engagement and learning.
Yes.
And they've shown that perhaps it's more effective than all
Yeah.
of other methods that have been suggested combined. So just wanted to know what your thoughts were on that, and if you have any advice on how to implement that, given how costly it is.
Great question. No, well, there's another one here, Mark.
Oh, I've got one here.
All right, you take that one, and I'll take the mic up to Mark here.
We have a group of visiting Thai scholars with us at the moment, and last week they were telling me that one of the attributes that their universities promote is compassion. And we were looking at VU's strategic plan, we were looking at our graduate capabilities, and it's implicit, but I wondered if you could help me convince our visiting Thais that we are actually, the ecological university can be compassionate.
I can't even remember what I ordered for my breakfast, so how you're going to do this one, I don't know, but well done. I think we all agree that universities are pervasive institutions, and we all probably agree with you that we can't imagine a world without universities. But I can imagine a world without many universities. So I think what you're saying is the university has got a future, but there's also a saying the future isn't what it used to be. So I put it to you that while some universities, perhaps those with the history, the pedigree, the cachet and the brand, will survive, I think many won't. I'll leave that with you.
Okay.
Okay, Ron, I don't know if you
you.
remember those four. So firstly, how would you market our first year model? Secondly, do you think team teaching is important? Third, how about compassion? Fourth, are we going to have fewer universities in the future?
I'll take more or less in reverse order. I think, no, I didn't... Let me just ask you quickly just to rehearse your question for me, because it was a bit technical for me. I'm very simple soul.
Basically, like promoting a transformative university,
Yeah.
university in transformation.
Yes.
Something that someone's, the audience
Yeah, okay. I see. I see. Well, what a thought, what a question. Well, you've got brilliant marketing people here, that's evident. But you need to think it through. And as I was being rather jaundiced in the first part of my talk about the language that universities just slip into. The great thing is to find your own language, which is going to do justice to where you are. We were talking this morning about what it means to be an authentic university, and that for me is pretty crucial, to do the hard thinking and hard work about where you want to go, and to find a terminology, a vocabulary that's going to do justice to how you see yourselves, and just start, working with it, and then it will get around as to how you see yourselves. We were even coming up with one or two new ideas this morning about possibilities for the language through which Victoria University might understand itself. On the matter of the diminishing number of universities, the possibly diminishing number of universities, certainly, as I was saying earlier today, it's a nice seminar question as to whether in 5 years' time we will see fewer or more universities. And you can read the tea leaves in different directions. You see all sorts of amalgamations going on. You see, particularly in the States, certain kinds of university just falling by the wayside, becoming insolvent or whatnot. So there's all of that. But we also see the birth of new universities in all sorts of ways. So it's a nice question as to whether we are seeing a falling away, a lessening of the number of universities. The general trend, frankly, has still tended to drift up. What is, I think, absolutely clear is that the number of students in higher education is going to continue to increase for some time to come. It might differ, it will differ, again, from nation to nation. Some nations seem to more or less have hit a plateau. But overall, we're going to see a continuous rise in the number of students. It's now about 200 million students in the world, and it's continuing, I think, to grow. So I don't have any doubt that we're going to see universities continuing to be a major institutional force in society, and for all sorts of reasons that I've touched upon, becoming even more central. I just go to the question at the back on team teaching. I've only, in a way, had that experience of team teaching, of working with others, both in the design of a course, in the running of a course, in the examining of a course. And certainly I used to run my own course, an MA course, but I was also, and that I did with other people, but I've also was a humdrum member of the course team, an MBA course in higher education management. I recommend, Vice Chancellor, you might even want to send one of your two of your senior colleagues to be a participant on it. It takes in participants from all over the world. But there we not only taught alongside each other, we were evaluated by the students alongside each other. It was a kind of beauty contest, and the students would give us scores, and we would put all the scores up for all the members of the course team, and everybody knew exactly where they were, how they were rated by all the students, and the students saw it all. So it was all transparent, it was all out in the open. So you jolly well had to come up to snuff. If the students thought you weren't up to it, they made it absolutely clear. So that was a nice little challenge, and it made you reflect on your team, on your approach to teaching, and how you were faring alongside other colleagues. I think nothing but good can come out of that. We need to open the doors, we need to open the windows, and teaching should be much more transparent in so many ways. So, I mean, just seems to be a natural evolution if you're not quite there already. And I've left the last one to last because for me, this idea of the compassionate university, if I can say so, again, is a logical follow-through of what I've been saying about the ecological university. You remember that persons, sociologists like to talk about subjectivities, form one of my ecosystems. And I want I mean, we shouldn't have to remind universities that students are actually human beings, but I'm afraid we sometimes forget about that. And that's why I was gently mentioning the kinds of anxiety that students have, and that universities, I'm afraid, sometimes unnecessarily provoke anxiety. By the way, I think we should be provoking a little bit of anxiety in our students, because that's partly what higher education is all about, taking students from one place into another strange and difficult place. And that is going to be a little anxiety provoking, but we need to do it carefully and gently, and the safety net always needs to be there. We need to use an old-fashioned but a Heideggerian word, we need to have a care or a concern towards our students. So I have no difficulty in saying that. The trouble is that in a mass higher education system, universities, 30,000, 50,000, go to South America, 200,000 students in a single university. Students get lost. And the question is, how do we offer them a home? Do you remember where I started the notion of ecology? What kind of home are we offering our students? So these are profound matters that we need to go on thinking about. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Ron. It just remains for me to pass a vote of thanks for Vice-Chancellor's lecturer for this year. And in doing so, I'd just like to say two or three things. One is, one of the objectives of the Vice-Chancellor's lecture is not only to present the lecture, but also to foster discussion across the university during your visit. And we've had a number of meetings during the day today with Ron of various parts of the university, and it's been a fantastic set of conversations that we've had with you. I want to thank you not only for tonight's lecture, but for the role you've played across the university during the day. That's the first point. The second one is that I think this discussion tonight around the compassionate university, and earlier today you talked about the conversational university. There are various characterisations of the university you've come up with, which I think are a good fit with Victoria University. And I think what we're doing in our transformation of pedagogy to this smaller group, high-touch, interactive, collaborative learning and teaching in a world of mass higher education is a remarkable change, but one that fits very well with the ecological university. I think I probably, as a professor of economics, should put in a little bit of a defence for economics in my closing remarks, because it got a little bit of a bad press during the course of the evening. But I'm pleased to say I had a very good discussion with Ron about economics earlier today, and that is one of the 7 ecosystems. But I think it can quite happily coexist and thrive with all of these other ecosystems. And I think that is what Victoria University is on about. And really great to have time with you today. And on behalf of everyone here, thank you very much for your lecture tonight, which I think was inspirational. And thanks everybody else for attending. And please join me in thanking Ron in the normal way.